Last Jedi is one of the most controversial movies that the Star Wars franchise has ever created, for the moment, but I'll get to that later. When this movie came out, I really loved it. I loved the story, I loved the action, and I thought it was one of the best Star Wars movies I'd ever seen. But as time went on, I looked back over it and I realised this movie wasn't as perfect as I first thought. Not bad, but not as good as it could have been. So what's the story? After destroying Starkiller base, the Resistance evacuate their base because the First Order is hunting them down. They manage to escape, but they realise that the First Order can track them through hyperspace, and such a massive chase scene takes place. Elsewhere on Ach-To, Rey finds Luke, who has no interest in training her. He flat out refuses and said that he came to this island to die, and regardless of what Rey tells him, he is not budging. Rey and Kylo then have a number of force projections, where Kylo tells Rey what actually happened on the night Luke tried to kill him. Across the galaxy, the Resistance is still running from the First Order. Poe is trying to find out what's going on, but Admiral Holdo won't tell him, and they realise that in order to get them to retreat, they need to find a master codebreaker on a planet called Canto-Bight, where they then board the First Order command ship and take out the tracking device. But they don't find this codebreaker, and instead they find another codebreaker and that says he can do the same job. On Ach-To, after learning how strong Rey is with the Force, Luke decides to teach her. He teaches her what the Force is, how to feel it, and then she goes to the dark side area of the cave. And this scares Luke because he fears that she'll turn out like Kylo Ren. After a number of lessons, she finds out from Kylo that Luke actually tried to kill Kylo, and such makes her leave the planet to try and bring Kylo back to the light. This doesn't work and leads her to getting captured. The chase scene is still going on, and Rey and Finn, Rose and this codebreaker try to sabotage the tracker, but fail and get captured as well. After getting the crew to abandon ship, Holdo does a hyperspace suicide maneuver, which destroys all of the cruisers, allowing Rey, Finn and Rose to escape. They then land on Crate, where they try and attack the First Order with speeders, but when they realise they are beaten, they fall back and try and find a way out, now that Luke is there as a force projection to distract Kylo and to allow them to escape. Now, looking back on this movie, I can see why it gets the criticisms that it does, but I don't see why everyone is making such a fuss about it. This movie is split in two. Everything Rey, Luke and Kylo I love the hell out of, not because of the story, and not because anything really happens, but the stuff that does happen is so well acted and so well written, it could be some of the best in any of the Star Wars films. When Luke was talking about the Force, it's exactly how Obi-Wan described it in A New Hope, about it surrounding us, binding the galaxy together and being a part of everything. Also, when Luke was talking about how the legacy of the Jedi is failure, hypocrisy, humorous and all that, it's one of my most favourite parts of Luke's character in this film. He realises why the Jedi fell in the prequel trilogy, and the fact that they knew about the clone army being created by Dooku, and yet they continued going on as normal, allowing Palpatine an easy rise to power, just right under their noses. He's saying the Jedi don't deserve to exist because of what they would become, and how they use it, and how it was used against them, but he never said how the light side should die. Rey and Kylo's exchange and conversation is also some of the best in the film as well. Kylo tells Rey that what she believes is not as black and white as she thinks, and that the Jedi are bad, and while he is not wrong, it's just a cheap ploy to get him to join her. But that is the deep two-way thinking that I love in Star Wars. We get some new things added to the way the Force works in this movie. When Kylo and Rey have their Force connections, we see that Kylo has water in his face from Rey's environment. That's the first time that we learn that you can transport matter through the Force, and it's things like that I love about Star Wars. The idea is that different people learn about the Force, it manifests into them differently, much like how genetics do in real life. New things in life are often discovered by people that are able to do things differently, by way of various different factors being different in their lives, and it helps us to evolve. Things like transferring of matter is evolving the use of the Force and how it works, and it's neat to see something like that. And people say that Luke is completely out of character in this movie. However, when you look into it, he really isn't. Both Yoda and Obi-Wan at the end of Revenge of the Sith went into exile because of the fall of the Jedi and the rise of the Empire, and this is exactly why Luke went into hiding. And personally, like I said with my Force Awakens review, I'm interested to see what happens when things don't go as planned and events take a change like it did in the Revenge of the Sith. Now, leaving a map behind him, however, is a bit goofy, and I was always expecting them to explain that, but they never did. Now we get to the chase scenes between the Resistance and the First Order, which in my opinion is the bad stuff. Mainly because nothing happens. Like, legit, nothing. The most that happens in the scenes is the initial battle where the Resistance lose a couple ships and are burning fuel. That's it. Nothing more happens. Holdo is refusing to give Poe any information on what's happening, which is so stupid. Like, why would you do that? I can sort of see why, because the First Order tracking them through hyperspace, and the initial thought would be that they have a spy in their teams, and she is being secretive because of that. You know, you get that impression. You don't get that impression straight away, and you have to think about it, but it's the small thing, and it doesn't really work. The whole stuff on Canto-Bight as well could have been cut because it's dumb and it's boring and it's not a lot happens. And in all fairness, half of those scenes that were in the chase scene, you could cut out the movie because they're just repeating the same thing over and over and over. Nothing is going on anywhere. So you could cut that out and add more scenes with Rey training with Luke on Act 2. That's what I want to see. And on a side note, the reason why I said at the start that it's the most controversial Star Wars movie and not the most hated is because after being on the internet and using it as much as I do, you begin to learn that the negative voice can be heard much more than the positive. And when you look deeper, you can find there are much more positive opinions than there are negative opinions. But those negative opinions are so loud that they take center stage and sway out a lot of people's thoughts at the state of the community. I'm not saying this is just something in Star Wars, because you find this in every part of life. But you'll see a post on social media about this movie. Clearly, you're going to have opinions on it. But what they have said. But if you look at the amount of people saying this movie is good or bad, it's more split than you may think. When you look, I was legitimately surprised personally. Something else that irritated lots of people in this movie was that Snoke was never explained. And yeah, that's true, but in the original trilogy you never really knew much about the Emperor, aside from the fact that he was the one pulling the strings. He was mentioned briefly in A New Hope, and he was first seen in Empire. But when Return came along, the Emperor died, and all you knew that he was the bad guy, and he was the one calling all the shots. But the biggest thing for me that I found I didn't like was, I didn't like Snoke that much to begin with. He didn't do much in The Force Awakens, and in The Last Jedi he sort of just sits in his chair and talks. But there's no evilness about him to make you fear him. Whereas with the Emperor, he has this cackle in his voice, and the way he presents himself is so evil, you could tell that he was the bad guy. He would have killed Luke if Vader hadn't intervened. But in The Last Jedi, Snoke gets Kylo to kill Rey. How am I meant to feel intimidated by this character when he doesn't do anything to make me feel this way? So yeah, it wasn't as good as I remember when I first watched it, but I still believe that some of the good stuff in this movie was some of the best in any of the Star Wars movies. But if you like this movie, they're good. And if you don't, I can see where you're coming from. But for me, it's easy to sit down and watch Rey, Kylo and Luke and ignore everything else.